Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Extreme Hangout for our next session this afternoon. The construction industry. It's a major contributor to the climate and ecological emergency we face, generating a whopping 40% of annual global greenhouse emissions. So therefore, we need to rethink the current norms in construction. It is an urgent and complex challenge. The way of design, produce, operate, restore our built environment must be radically altered. Mobilizing such changes demands cross-sectoral, cooperative, and of course, creative relationships that harness our collective agency. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you today via my wonderful friends at the Klosters Forum, whom I have great love and affection for, friends that I have met through the Klosters Forum. Paul King, I welcome you to the stage, and Dr. Mae-Ling Lokko, who's a professor and founder of Yale School of Architecture, Kidus Asfaw, CEO and founder of Built Cubic, Simone Mangili, Executive Director of Carbon Neutral Cities, and Joy Guy, who's the head of the APN programs. Welcome you all to the stage. Let's give them a warm welcome, a round of applause. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed for the warm welcome. And warm it certainly is. You'll have to bear with me. I've literally just got off an aeroplane from the UK where it was minus something or other when I got on the plane. And when I got off, it came as a bit of a shock. So bear with me if I wilt over the course of the next hour. My name's Paul King, as you just heard. I'm delighted to welcome you here and the many thousands of people who are watching this live stream around the world, I have no doubt. And in a second, I'm going to introduce our very esteemed panel here because we've got some brilliant expertise in the room with us today. As you've just heard, we're going to talk a bit about the built environment. It's pretty unusual for most of us to be sitting outside. Most of us spend about 90% of our life inside. So when you think about it, if you think about that is our natural habitat increasingly for people around the world, it's not surprising that we use a phenomenal amount of resources to actually create that built environment. But it is, as you just heard, pretty staggering what we're talking about. The built environment accounts for, the latest figures suggest, 42% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Also accounts for about 50% of natural resource use. It's an incredible footprint on the planet. Over the course of my short lifetime, all the trends have been going in the wrong direction. In my lifetime, atmospheric concentrations of greenhouse gases have increased by over 1/3. And wildlife species populations have declined by over 2/3. Incredibly depressing to think that's happened in my lifetime. And if we look ahead, the built environment is only going to get bigger. In fact, it's going to get much, much bigger. It's estimated that between now and 2050, the number of buildings around the world is going to double. So just in the next 25 years, we're going to see a doubling of the buildings around the world. We simply cannot afford to carry on building those buildings the way that we have in the past, particularly in Western Europe, North America, and other more developed parts of the world. We cannot afford to build that way. So we need some radically different solutions, and that's what we're going to be exploring on this panel. We're going to be here from some amazing innovators, thinkers and doers about these challenges. My day job, just so that you know, is I work for an organization called Built by Nature. And we exist to promote the use of mass timber and other bio-based materials as a climate and nature solution. Not for profit, born just 2 years ago, and I just recently joined the organization. So that's where I'm coming from. But let me, more importantly, introduce our other speakers. So immediately to my left, delighted to introduce Dr. Mae-Ling Lokko, who is an assistant professor at Yale University School of Architecture and Yale Center for Ecosystems in Architecture. She's an architectural scientist, designer, and educator from Ghana and the Philippines, whose work focuses on the upcycling of agro-waste and biopolymer materials. She'll tell us a bit more about what that means in a minute. She is also the founder of Willow Technologies, focused on the research, design, and development of bio-based building materials. And Lokko's work has been exhibited in some very prestigious galleries and museums right around the world. So it's a real pleasure to have you here with us. Then coming next to Kidus Asfaw, who is the co-founder and CEO of Cubic. Am I pronouncing that right? Cubic, of course it is. An environmental tech company turning hard to recycle waste, plastic waste, into low carbon and low cost buildings. Cubic's mission is to build dignity through clean and affordable living for all, a vision that gave it the honor of being Africa's Startup of the Year. Previously, he led UNICEF's open source projects with over 40 country deployments to support some of the largest and most critical programs to improve the lives of children. He's also worked for the World Bank, Accenture, and Google. So quite a range of experience. Delighted to have you, Kidus. I'm then going to come to Simone Mangili, who is the Executive Director of the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance. Simone leads CNCA's strategic development initiatives aimed to support member cities in driving innovation and setting the course for climate neutral cities around the world. He's got over 20 years of experience working across local government, non-profits, and the private sector. His passion is working with cities, stakeholders, and communities at the nexus of climate change and sustainability, with a strong commitment to social equity and regenerative approaches. And finally, last but not least, delighted to welcome Joy Guy, who is the Programs Head of Asia Pacific at the World Green Building Council. Joy champions sustainability through impactful programs in collaboration with green building councils and their partners. She expertly builds connections across the region and build networks and engagement with partners. She has a background as a principal engineer and project leader, leading significant projects around net zero buildings and eco-cities. She leverages her skills in life coaching as well and positive psychology to instill a sustainable mindset, fostering change through compassion and commitment. So welcome to you all. It's a fantastic, and as you can see, a very, very diverse panel with a great range of experience. So I'm going to come to each of you in turn with a question and just ask you to say a few words to introduce your particular take on this topic. How can we radically transform our built environment, creating buildings and cities that actually work in harmony with nature rather than wreak havoc on it? So if I come to Mae-Ling first. Mae-Ling, your work in upcycling agri waste and biopolymer materials is pioneering. How do you envision these materials transforming the construction industry in terms of their carbon footprint and their impact on nature, but also building aesthetics? Give us some insights.
Is this working?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. And thank you, Paul. It's fantastic to be here. About a decade ago, I started working with an agricultural residue, coconut husk, which is the byproduct of a multi-billion-dollar food and cosmetic industry. And it sort of piles on the roadsides in urban environments, particularly in tropical countries where there's this extreme desire, right, for all sorts of coconut products like coconut water, coconut oil. And coconut husk is part of a much broader stream of materials, bio-based materials, agricultural residues, that one could call one of the world's most underutilized resources. And if we think about agricultural residues that come out of forestry, these comprise about 140 gigatons of raw materials that today we're downcycling or prematurely burning, to get rid of it as fast as possible, to get it off our fields and our streets. And it's a wonderful opportunity to think about these materials in terms of becoming a new feedstock for our buildings, because they have this wonderful dual capacity. As they grow, they're actually sequestering carbon throughout their lifetime. And many times they're amazing local solutions because it's the climate and the soils and those patterns that train these materials to essentially do really amazing work in our buildings if processed correctly. And then we have this opportunity to delay the carbon emissions that come from burning or having them disintegrate on the forest floor or landfills by actually bringing them into our buildings. So essentially using them as carbon sinks and delaying that emissions peak. So it's a wonderful sort of raw material to start thinking about coming to sort of reduce the carbon footprint of a lot of these high energy, high embodied carbon, mineral-based building materials like concrete, glass, steel, reconstituted wood products that have a lot of toxic chemicals in there. And throughout that whole life cycle carbon equation, bio-based materials can be a really amazing, locally appropriate solution for a whole range of contexts around the world.
Wonderful, wonderful stuff. And it's incredible to think, as you say, of these materials which we've tended to consider as waste products, right? I mean, and you mentioned there, you know, one of the things that's common to many bio-based materials. By bio-based, we're talking about natural, renewable materials, right? So that could be timber, it could be wood from trees, it could be hemp, it could be straw, it could be bamboo, it could be fungus, it could be seaweed, it could be a myriad of different things. And what these things all have in common is sometimes referred to this triple S effect, where they sequester carbon, they suck carbon out of the atmosphere as they grow. They can be used to substitute for, as you say, more carbon-intensive materials, and then they can lock up and store that carbon for a very long time if they're cared for in the right way. I mean, you mentioned concrete and steel. It's quite incredible. Concrete and steel industry are both making big efforts to try and decarbonize, but right now they are used more than almost any other resource globally. If you look at the carbon footprint of concrete and steel, they each account for between 7 and 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions. You know, if these materials were countries, they would just be coming in after China and the US in terms of the emitters. This is the kind of scale that we're talking about. So going from kind of things that we often think of as natural waste, I mean, Cubic is dealing with a very different kind of waste, right? So tell us a bit more about your feedstock and the innovation that Cubic's leading.
Yeah. So Cubic takes hard to recycle plastic waste. We are converting it into building materials that are low cost compared to concrete-based buildings, but it's also lower carbon. Now, our journey at Cubic actually started at UNICEF, where I used to work before. So we were thinking about circularity and what we can do to remove waste from low-income urban areas, especially in West Africa. And as part of that process, we discovered this really cool company that was converting plastic waste into bricks, and we decided to make over 500 schools in Côte d'Ivoire using that technology. Now, my personal journey around Cubic actually started in 2018. One day, there was this news about a landfill in an area that I grew up in Addis Ababa, that actually had an avalanche, like a literal avalanche, which killed over 130 people around it. And for me, that was the moment that I realized there's the city that I actually grew up in that had a mountain of both plastic but organic waste that was over capacity and actually affected the lives of people there. And I was starting to think a lot about what we can do about that. So the moment that, you know, this technology that we were using, this program at UNICEF was really working, for me really did bring it back to, you know, my childhood, you know, my city, and how we can take that and do something even better. So at Cubic, one of the things that we're really looking at is how do we actually provide a dignified way of living by providing really solid structure for people that can't afford it, but at the same time cleaning up that community. And plastic waste is one of these things that have a lot of downstream effect beyond kind of the visual eyesore that you see. So what we decided to do is really focus on, like, what does it take for people to buy this stuff, right? What does it take for us to, you know, sell this to people? And we decided to focus on real estate developers. Real estate developers feel the pain of rising costs of things like cement. In Ethiopia, the price of cement went up threefold in a 4-month span in 2022, right? So they don't have an incentive to be building affordable homes. They don't have the incentive to be thinking about expanding their project. So we said, how do we get our product to be 40% cheaper? Let's incentivize them that way and create a product that is super boring, right? This thing just looks like any other thing that you see on the market. And by doing that, we've created this demand for materials that are a bit more sustainable, that are a bit more affordable. But on the other hand, we've also created demand for taking out waste that nobody else is recycling or buying. When something doesn't have value, it ends up in a landfill. And that landfill in Addis Ababa is a great testament that there's a lot of it that has very little demand. And we decided to create demand around stuff that nobody else is buying, convert it into this product that people will buy, and all while being able to provide affordability in housing, but also be able to take out plastic waste.
And I have to say, I mean, just before we started the session, you were showing some of us some pictures on your phone, and we've got you probably have posted them already, but if not, you've got to post those online, and we should share those, because seeing these affordable homes built from this incredible material, and also seeing where that material comes from, is quite mind-boggling, and it's a brilliantly inspiring initiative, and obviously, you know, wish you all the very best with it. But we must definitely share some images of that. I'm going to come on to Simone. Simone, as I said, you work with cities around the world. We are increasingly urban creatures as a species. You know, the majority of living in cities. That's only set to increase between now and 2050. You know, these cities have got incredible challenges on their plate. How are you seeing a way to work with these cities and help share learning between them to lead to a more sustainable form of development over the next 25 years?
Thanks, Paul. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the question. We at Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance are just that, an alliance of global cities charting the path towards carbon neutrality. These are cities that have set themselves very ambitious targets to carbon neutrality, 2030, 2035, and so on. And that means that these targets and ambitions are now looming very close, and cities are taking a stock of how they are reaching their net zero targets, their carbon neutrality targets, and really beginning to kind of hone in, focus on the strategies that have been most effective over the past years. And that also means that cities are beginning to take a hard look at some of the harder to reach emissions, those emissions that have traditionally been out of sort of reach of traditional carbon policy, emissions such as those embodied in our buildings and our built environment. And that presents a whole host of challenges that cities are grappling with today. Challenges around how to work upstream in procuring these materials, these bio-based materials, or downstream in procuring materials that have traditionally become a waste stream. That means working across administrations, breaking across silos, working in embodied carbon. To reduce embodied carbon means working across entire administrations, from procurement departments to zoning and planning departments to permitting and demolition and waste management and circular economy focuses. And so that means really working broadly with a whole of government approach. And that's traditionally outside of sort of the climate, the climate leaders kind of general field of action. So these are all very real challenges. And as if that wasn't enough, a lot of this work in trying to create a built environment that is far more carbon neutral, if not carbon positive and regenerative, involves creating and instigating the demand for such a change on behalf of communities, on behalf of individuals who don't really respond to speak about carbon or carbon neutrality, who have a great deal, a host of other challenges that they're trying to find solutions to. And so finding ways to create policies, to craft policies that really go to meet people's needs, and finding ways to really mobilize communities to demand that transition is another area that cities are really challenged by. Not to mention that the climate challenge is now being compounded with many other crises, including the energy crisis, food crises, housing crises, and so on. And so climate leaders are often finding that their climate actions have to respond to a whole host of challenges that are traditionally outside of the climate space. And so what we found with our cities is that cities really appreciate and need the space, not just to share approaches and strategies, but also to actually work together, to share the how of getting past some of these roadblocks, of getting to some of these harder to reach emissions, of making changes across administrations, mobilizing across departments and silos, and engaging with communities in a new way, in new partnerships with, and doing that together with other climate leaders, charting the course, finding ways that really resonate, really put communities first in the process, is where cities, I think, are really focusing today.
Thank you very much. Let me come to you, Joy. As I said, you're working in Asia. You work with a variety of different partners, and of course in a region that is very diverse. How does it feel to you dealing with these very different kind of diverse, different cultures, different contexts in Asia, when you're dealing with these sorts of issues around a transformation of our built environment? Is it seen in a common way, or do you see big differences between the different countries that you work with?
Yeah, This is a very interesting question because when we look at the built environment, there are many challenges we're facing, but two of the main challenges we see is one is that there is a huge diversity in terms of region. So in Asia Pacific, we have 17 green building councils, 17 different culture, many different language, and the perspective of caring about the building as well. So looking at diversity and converging into one common goal is one of the key challenge. And the next challenge is in the built environment, we see we are actually using a conventional way of thinking of how we live and how we design our building. So taking a step back, the way we are driving changes in this kind of diversity has two key folds, zooming in and zooming out. So how do we zoom in is we wanted to see that how we're able to understand the needs and also the perspective of each region. So we're able to change, make change in the local context that they accept. And zooming out is in the World Green Building Council, we do have this North Star goal. We also have the policy and framework to help them understand where is the direction that we're leading towards. So there are three things that we are driving forward. The first thing is about rethinking, because we see the building in this built environment, this kind of shelter can be defined as a building, but it has a very little energy consumption compared with Ski Dubai or any of this shopping mall with like super cold temperature. So there is definitely a new way that we can define how we live and how the building is able to protect the environment for us. And then the second thing is about the second thing is about this redefine. There's a lot of things that we have the definition about how we do net zero, how we define luxury, how we define comfort. But there are many ways that we are able to challenge ourselves that is this comfort? Is this a luxury? Is this a comfort space that you wanted to live with? Is it in the future, the CEO office is a fully nature embrace design with natural ventilation, has all the greenery around? That's the new luxury you're having. Is that the new bag you're carrying is synthetic leather but not animal leather? So there's a lot of new definition we want to redefine where good means to us. And the last one I wanted to really echo this material part is about the value, because we say a lot of existing building has no value, or exactly a waste material has low value. But is that true? Because everything carries a value, but it depends on how we define it. If we're able to see the embodied carbon loaded in the building is a strong value that we don't want to demolish, but renovate from there, it's actually a huge change in this industry about how we make change. So diversity, we zoom in with what is the local context, what we need, zooming out with the global North Star goal and the direction we want to have. In this way, we're confident that we can and we should be able to make drastic change, and we have to do it faster.
Thank you. I do want to make just a quick apology in advance for Joy, because she's got to speak at another event across the green zone in a little while, so she's going to have to leave us a bit early. But in a few minutes, I want to come to the audience here and see if any of you've got any questions. So just an advance warning: if you haven't got any questions, wave at me in a couple of minutes, and I will come to you. I guess, look, a big question for me when we talk about these things in this sort of environment is, these all sound fantastic, right? Whether we're talking about, plastic waste, whether we're talking about natural waste, bio-based materials that are currently considered waste more than materials for building. The question is, can we really scale this? Having just come on the metro for an hour and a quarter from the airport, you look across a sea of concrete and glass and steel, right? And you don't see very many bio-based materials. Now, that may be unfair. There are many cities that are much the same. Can we really shift the dial? Do we think actually we can upscale and mainstream these kind of materials? I'm going to kind of look to, I don't want to keep going in order, but who would like to come in on that one first? The question of, can we scale this? Yeah, Simone.
I think we can. I think cities have a real role to play in this process. We're finding that cities are traditionally sort of less familiar with some of these materials, and we've been supporting them to create awareness, to create capacity around the use of these materials, their performance, their procurement processes that lead to truly sustainable and regenerative material flows that create livelihoods for people and protect and conserve nature and regenerate nature. And that's not an easy process. It's unfamiliar from a production side, but it's just as unfamiliar from a policy standpoint. But cities have enormous power in sort of removing barriers to the use of these materials and raising awareness and creating demand amongst communities and residents, and in really redefining how we build our cities. So I think, we've been supporting a cohort of cities in Europe to really dig deep into the use of bio-based materials, how these can work for new buildings, how these can work in retrofitting and renovation, and how to make these work for people. So I think there's a real strong case to be made that policymakers, especially at the urban level, can really contribute to scaling up.
Thank you.
Just want to add in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add in that, because if we look at scalability and also how we're able to amplify the change. So the first thing is that we really wanted to demonstrate the product and the solution has its benefit. For example, the lighting industry in the built environment is doing fantastic, because you're going to supermarket, you will automatically buy the energy efficient lamps. And these are actually already proven that a sustainable product doesn't necessarily means to be expensive, and it's definitely a first choice of everyone. And also timber building is already getting this scale, and then people start to use new material for their building structure as well. So the key things I understand is the demand signal. When we really build something that is able to take place, we're actually creating a very strong demand signal that to trigger the policy change. And thereafter, it started to trigger more and more innovation and bring the cost down, and then started to scale and make into like to mainstream of this product. So there's a lot of things about mindset and how we how we understand and how do we define the products. And this is something that we hope the change could be made in this positive trend.
Thank you. I think Mae-Ling, you're going to come?
Yeah, no, I think with bio-based materials, we've seen timber as a big brother. It's sort of led the way. And in particular, we're seeing a lot of demand for mass timber to replace, steel and reinforced concrete for structural applications. But we know in association with the timber demand, particularly what's going to be demanded over the course of this century, there is a ton of risks that we have when we see the pace at which demand is rising that currently outpace afforestation practices, particularly in places where, the management of forestry is a huge problem. Where I'm from in Ghana, we have our timber allowable annual cuts being exceeded between 2.5 to 3 times every year. And it's a cycle where there's growing old infrastructure, which is driving higher paces of deforestation. So in those parts of the world, this is a real risk. But the question around, is there enough biomass to meet the demand for not just buildings, but we know these materials are going to compete with food, with pharmaceuticals, with textiles, a whole range of applications. I think one of the most interesting studies that has come out just looking at really fast growing biomass like bamboo, in particular for structural applications in the global south, and straw, in particular for insulation applications in the global north, we can see there actually is a considerable amount of supply relative to demand. But what's concerning is, how are we scaling? Because over a half of every crop that's grown on our planet today is one of the big four: sugar, corn, rice, and wheat. And now the emerging super crop, soy. And it is scary to see the impacts on biodiversity that you were describing, Paul. And some of the labor practices that we see in agriculture and forestry being exacerbated, in the building material life cycle. So the question of how do we scale appropriately for local, regional, and global demands is something that we all have to decide. These are locally specific decisions. But, this is really important to bear because all our models of scaling have had disastrous impacts, both environmentally, socially, and, particularly from an equity standpoint. So there's a lot of work to do with thinking about a new horizon, when we think about these transition economies.
Absolutely. Kidus, did you want to come?
I think when we're thinking about scale, sometimes market incentives are underrated in the thinking. Whenever you have something novel, like the first thing you need to figure out is like, who's going to buy it and are they going to buy it? before we started Cubic, one of the ideas that we actually had was to invest in companies that did something like what we did in Cote d'Ivoire with UNICEF. And it was mind-blowing to see the obsession with how cool the product that they have was versus thinking about who's going to buy it, right? So in our case, what we started to think about was less about like the product, the brick we were making, and more about who's in pain right now, how big is that pain for them, and how big are these people, and what do we need to do to actually alleviate it? Like really think about that problem. It really came down to cost and speed of building, right? So in our product development strategy, we said, stay boring, stay cheap, and think about how to make this super easy to build with. And that's how we actually got clients, right? Now, when we start thinking about scale, it's going to be very different because we've done this in Ethiopia. You know, we have a few like client profiles and what they want, but the diversity of demand in building is also very, very different. Even from, you know, our neighbors in Kenya and Ethiopia, it's very, very different. So we need to think about the incentives people have to switch over and not just think about whether this is sustainable and novel and cool.
Absolutely.
Progress. So when we think about dignity or dignified way of living for most, it does involve some kind of cement-looking thing, right? So you've seen the picture of our material. Kind of looks like that, and that's on purpose, right? The moment people feel a relationship towards what it means to progress or to feel dignified, then you've really crossed that hurdle. You don't do it by saying, you're living in a plastic brick, right? You say that by saying, you say it by mentioning this is strong, this looks like it, but it's cheaper. You can actually buy it. And that's how we've been able to cross that bridge.
Very good. Mae-Ling?
Yeah, no, I mean, this is a huge challenge. I think a decade ago when we came out with this really robust, strong coconut panel, I mean, this is something that is closer to the strength of oak, close to plywood. And we tried to market it both in European, North American, and West African markets. The most difficult to convince customers were actually West African clients and architects because of that social and cultural perception that these materials were made from local, low quality or low tech resources. But I think the key lever is really around how you design these materials to be desirable. And it's complex because these materials are caught up in long cultural memories of vulnerability. I mean, you think about ancient civilizations and their built environments that were burnt, right, through different conflicts, through colonial conflicts in a matter of minutes, right, with fire. So fire is one of the most difficult forces in terms of changing people's perceptions. It's one of the first questions you always get. The other is what lives inside these materials, insects, rodents. There's a connection to nature that we still think we're outside of, right? And we fear that. So how do you actually design in ways that actually can prevent certain conditions like condensation and mold growth and all of this stuff, fire spread? And this all comes into the toolkit of designers and architects. So design can play a huge role. And I've primarily exhibited around the world to change people's social perception of these materials by taking very symbolic architectural thresholds and symbols, whether it's the mine or the door of no return. These are thresholds found in slave forts all along the coast of West Africa, or landscapes that actually take a material economy, typically mineral-based, and reconstitute that with bio-based materials. Because I think the cultural memories and identities we have with materials is much deeper. And I think we heard it on the panel right before, comfort, like we're all kind of sweating over here. And, when we talk about bio-based materials, they lie within the paradigm of passive conditioning, right? That we're going to wait for our thatch roof or our breathable materials to modulate temperature and humidity. And we've gotten so used to, pressing a button and getting cool, dry air within seconds. And so how do we also create a different ritual of living that allows us to move in concert with local climatic patterns? It's a challenge. We can see that right now. But trying to find aspirational ways of shifting lifestyles, I think it's a whole creative, enterprise and practice we're going to have to, really all buy into.
Thank you. I'm gonna have to let Joy go. Can I just check? Are there any questions in the room? Yes, sir. I wanted to get one in before. Please do.
All right.
I've got a microphone. Scott Francisco, close associate of many on the panel, and especially Paul at Built by Nature. I'm going to put on a couple of hats quickly: an architect's hat, and an investor's hat, and also an urban planner's hat. And my challenge to the panel is, it's more than a question, is I'm envisioning a collaboration between everyone on the panel here that could be absolutely astounding and actually potentially cut through some of these challenges of perception and acceptance. And from the architect's point of view, the risk factor of, am I getting into something that's untried? Will my clients accept it? Can I convince a client? And the best thing that I could have at my disposal for that would be an example, a pilot, something that I could show them, right? So I'm just envisioning a city from one of Simone's network who's desperately trying to achieve their net zero target, committing to a pilot of, say, a modest housing development, which uses this amazing recycled plastic block and some of Mae-Ling's husk panels and perhaps a bamboo frame from our friend Arif Rabik or one of the other bamboo producers. So here you have a hybrid bio-based and waste-based housing project, which we can all go and see and touch and check it out and point my clients to and say, look what we can do. Look at how awesome this thing is. But where does the drive come from? Where's the system shift where we can say, look, yeah, we're doing it. We have 5 million, 10 million of investment money ready to actually make this thing happen. You guys all step up to the plate. Everyone's organizations are in there collaborating. So I guess the question to Simone first would be, can you imagine one of your cities who are so desperate to achieve their target, who have these hard to abate areas, and this is an opportunity for a net zero, maybe net negative project that you can call on this group for?
Can I just, before I let you answer, Simone, is there anything you want to chip in before you need to run? Because I've got to let you go first.
Yeah, so I really like this question because first of all, we really wanted to start somewhere so that we can have this collaboration. So where is this kickstart? So the first question is that we really wanted to see that we have a common vision and common direction we're going. If everyone is heading to the same direction, for example, net zero city, we will naturally come like full force together with this, and eventually this will happen. And the second thing is that a strong and aggressive policy will be able to trigger some of the changes and bring these changes even more fast and speed up the process. And also, there's also one more thing that I wanted to highlight is when we are talking about the mindset alignment, there's also another alignment is where the language is falling in place. Because if we're looking at the language of collaboration, we also need to see that whether we are communicating into the same level of the perception. So at the World Green Building Council, definitely we have this policy framework to align with the local voice, regional perspective, and also the global direction. So we're able to realign the language together with this common goal. And we really hope this will be able to facilitate the change and to see something that we can touch, feel, and experience and scale up in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you. And excuse me for that. I'm going to run for the next panel. And all the best for the rest of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. Simone.
So I'll pick it back up, Scott, and thank you for the stimulation provocation. You're actually anticipating what we plan on doing in the second phase of our project. We've been working with a cohort in Europe of 12 cities who, as I mentioned, this has been a capacity building process, right? These are new materials, these are new procurement processes, these are new planning and zoning and permitting approaches that have to be pioneered, that have to be piloted and so forth. In the second phase of our project, we are looking for leading cities to really step up with actionable projects that can put bio-based materials in those buildings. But to take it a step further, it's not just a request. Many cities are now beginning to face actually a necessity of doing so. There's national requirements coming down. There's metropolitan area level requirements coming down on the use of bio-based materials. In France, 50% of public buildings need to incorporate, moving forward, bio-based materials. In the Amsterdam metropolitan region, it's 20% of new buildings and so forth. So this is going to have to happen, and our cities are poised to be that test case. But if I could add one more consideration too, circling back to the question of sort of the cultural piece of this. I think we have to acknowledge that this is not a question that's related only to whether this type of construction is happening in the global south, but it's just as relevant, I think, in our leading cities in the global north, who are the majority of the members of CNCA. Because we have to acknowledge that we have communities that have been historically oppressed and frontline communities in our cities that may very well react in analogous ways to initiatives that try to kind of impose new building materials or new ways of living in space and so forth. And I think the real key to that is what I kind of was opening up with at the beginning, is how our cities are really being challenged to work differently with communities. And a process, even in a pilot project, as you're suggesting, Scott, where maybe a city administration brings forward an affordable housing project that they'd like to complete with certain types of materials, Well, that's not going to happen in a vacuum. That's going to take sincere and genuine trust building and power sharing with communities and working with community-based organizations to make that a reality that works for people and that puts the lived experiences of people at the center of such a project. So I would definitely, push to keep the process question straight and sort of center in the dialogue around the what at the same time.
Thank you, Simone. So time, as is the way with these things, is flowing by. I just want to scan the room and see if anybody else had a question in the room. Any other questions in the room? Yes, sir.
I'll make a really easy question. If you had a magic wand and you could change one big thing, like a big systemic barrier or lever that you think would massively accelerate progress, what would you change? For each person.
Thank you for that
question.
Yeah, nice question.
Well, good
so
closure,
magic wand, one thing that you could change in the terms of our built environment, sustainability of our built environment going forward. Well, maybe I don't want to limit it. You can just have a magic wand. What would it be? Mae-Ling.
There's so many. Just one. Okay.
Sorry.
I know this might be a little controversial to say, but often I found, in trying to market bio-based materials to potential customers, particularly when the industry is not mature enough to scale up and meet the demands very quickly, that it is important to actually Trojan horse these materials through widely used conventional material technologies. So if there was an actual requirement for every material to sort of figure out how a bio-based component could play a role in your supply chain manufacturing, whether it's a binder, whether it's a coating, whether it's a glue, I think that would create an opportunity to give bio-based industries time, essentially, to mature and to transition their workforce, slowly, as much as possible in conventional building materials supply chains, while building up, knowledge, expertise to mature, these industries. So it's sort of a whole building material cycle, sort of encouragement. But I think there's no material that's bad. I think we're so far on one spectrum in terms of, certain types of mineral-based synthetic chemicals that we need to start to figure out what are all the alternatives and different ways of nurturing, sort of biomass-based systems. So,
thank you.
There's been something on my mind for a while. So we work in 3 sectors, right? Manufacturing to make our stuff, waste management to get our stuff, and real estate. And one trend that we're seeing is the majority of the workforce are actually women in all 3 of these. But they're probably the ones that are the lowest on the totem pole when it comes to the value that they get. And we've been putting a lot of effort to try to figure out how to fix that in our own way. So for example, when it comes to waste, we buy from collectors because they're the ones who are doing all the heavy lifting, but they probably get 0.5% of the value that we're actually buying. So we want to buy it from them. When it comes to manufacturing, we actually focus a lot on investing in female production managers, engineers. We actually see women to be a lot better at doing those jobs as well, instead of just keeping them as factory floor workers. And then in real estate, same thing. I don't know how it is in Accra, but in Ethiopia, a lot of the people who actually carry all that cement up and down, the ones who carry the rest, they're women, right? Contrary to the belief that they're weak or they can't handle that type of work. So we focus on actually investing in more for women, right? So for men. And I think the reason that has mattered to me is when we think about climate change, there's this book called Project Drawdown that some of you guys might know. And one of the 10 solutions, top 10 solutions, is investing in women. It has a lot to do with them being the most investable asset class to tackling climate change. So the way that I would, answer that question is invest more in women in these 3 sectors and find ways of getting a lot more capital, at least for Cubic, to focus on that.
Very good. Simone.
Tough question. Well, I would answer in maybe in a couple of ways. Because I think the first part of my answer is not really a magic wand. It's just sort of a helpful wand. Is getting full life cycle assessment of our construction materials established across the board, across geographies, would give a tremendous push to the market to innovate and to integrate regenerative practices, regenerative sourcing of bio-based materials and other materials, circular economy materials, into our building stocks, both for new buildings and for renovation. And to a certain extent, that's happening, but accelerating that and making it happen faster and faster would be a great one. But I'd go even further. I think as we're developing the performance standards, environmental performance standards for materials and so forth, and standardizing them and codifying life cycle assessments of carbon and so forth, the magic wand that would really come in, I think, to be a real game changer would be to pair that with social assessments and equity assessments of materials, processes, and so forth, that would actually lead to an innovation in the market. And we're seeing that in some ways, and we're seeing the power of cities to generate that kind of market innovation. I bring the example of Helsinki, who's recently been exploring and implementing carbon scored land sale competitions, where they put a big weight on the amount of carbon footprint of a new building, not just from operations, but the embodied carbon footprint. And their experience in doing so and in setting a maximum limit on the carbon footprint of new buildings is actually that the market has responded incredibly positively. The developers that they've engaged with, the builders they've engaged with, have responded quite positively, saying, thank you for setting that demand, that context, because that is what gives us the cover to actually innovate and to try and justify a new type of approach, a new type of material, and so forth. And were we able to do that beyond, starting with the environmental performance standard, but were we able to do that in terms of the opportunity to create new jobs, to be reparative and restorative to our traditionally, marginalized or oppressed communities, and bring those two together and really create new opportunities for equitable development? I think that would be, my magic wand.
Thank you very much. I think we probably need to pretty much wrap up at this point. I just want to finish with a little anecdote of my own, which I shared with a couple of people recently. Until quite recently, I was working for a major developer, multinational property developer, investor, builder, and asset manager. And it's a very good company, and they set some very ambitious carbon targets. And this time last year, we produced a report in terms of how we were doing in Europe in terms of our carbon targets. And we managed to report that we had achieved a 54% reduction in scope 1 and 2 emissions. So that relates to the fuel that we burn ourselves on construction sites and so on, and the power that we use, the electricity we purchase and so on. 54% year on year. Felt pretty good about that. Then you turn the page in the report and it says, however, 99% of our carbon footprint is scope 3. And 96% of that is upstream in the materials that go into our buildings. Right, that puts it into perspective, right? We have to shift the attention to the embodied carbon and the wider embodied ecological impacts of the materials that we put into our buildings. And that's the opportunity we've got. In many countries, they don't even regulate that. They don't include that in their building codes at the moment. We don't in the UK, where I come from. We need to change that. We need to shift the attention there. And then, as we've heard, we've got an opportunity to build an industry around the world that is the task of which is to build a built environment the size of which we already have. And by the way, we've got to retrofit the one that we've got at the moment. So there's an enormous opportunity, an economic opportunity, a social opportunity, an environmental opportunity that we have to seize. So I think on that note, I think I'll wrap it up. I want to say a huge thank you to all of our panel and of course Joy, who we lost. But thank you all. Fantastic examples. We're obviously going to share these on social media. Do have a look. You've got to have a look at Cubic's buildings and their wonderfully dull material that makes wonderfully exciting buildings. All the fantastic stuff that Mae-Ling has exhibited around the world. and the amazing stuff that Simone is doing in partnership with cities that are really leading the way on this. So thank you all for tuning in and for being here, and have a good week. Thank you.